Welcome to Vulva Stories with Vicky. I'm here today with the wonderful Kathryn. Kathryn, could you please just explain to everybody a bit about you, what you do, why you're here? So I know that you're a mental health nurse and you're currently working in CBT facilitation.
Yep.
Could you just tell us a little bit about that and what brought you here today?
So I've been interacting with your Facebook page over the last few months, and I find it really, really interesting. I think there is a big connection between mental health and for women as well, and our self-esteem. And I think sex and sexuality has a lot to do with that. So I just got really stuck into your Facebook posts and thought, you know what? I think it'd be really interested to sit down and have an actual conversation with you about this from a personal and slightly professional perspective. Obviously, I'm not going to be sharing anybody's personal information. A lot of what I'm going to answer is based on my own experiences, just with that kind of background knowledge about how mental health and the way we think and the way we feel can really impact on how we interact with other people. Because a lot about sex is about interpersonal relationships. Yes, okay, we also like to be a little bit more solo play on on the Vicky Crone side things. Yeah, we're all into that. I just thought it'd be really interesting to have a conversation, and especially with it being Mental Health Awareness Month, thinking about how the two are strongly linked.
Absolutely, and I've absolutely loved our conversations, and it just really shows I think the way you've adapted in the group and the things you've been sharing and stuff has really helped other women also interact and build up their confidence to also reply, because this is a type of stuff that women have been taught that they're not allowed to speak about.
Absolutely.
So it's really important, and I'm so grateful that you have got involved and you've given other women that sort of confidence. It's so needed. So we're talking about sex and self-esteem today.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, like you said. Very important. How, in your opinion, how do you think self-esteem is connected to sex or sexuality?
Well, I think for a lot of people, I do think it is strongly connected, maybe in a few different ways. I think that if you're somebody that does have low self-esteem, then it can be really, really difficult for you to open up and be open towards sexual experiences, especially with other people, and maybe not talking about sex as much. And I think those people would still probably feel that there is that big taboo. And I think that if you have low self-esteem, then it can be difficult to open up to sources of pleasure, feel like you're deserving of that. Then on the other hand, I think that having that intimacy with somebody else can really help to boost your self-esteem and make you feel more confident. But then again, there's another flip side to that for me. I think it can be healthy and unhealthy if that's where you're getting all of your self-esteem and all of your validation from. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that kind of later in the podcast. But women and the subject of sex has been a huge interest in the psychological field for like over 100 years, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I do think that women who are more confident in their sexuality and their self-esteem generally are more likely to enjoy the act of being intimate, either with themselves or with other people, be more vocal about it, less ashamed, more explorative, open to new experiences. Whereas I do think, as I say, women who seek out sex purely for validation do tend to have quite low self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And actually, you touched upon it a bit there. My next question is about how you see this like presenting for women. Do you? I know we said we're going to speak mainly on your personal, and then bring that knowledge from your work.
Mm-hmm.
Front. So how do you see this, in your everyday interactions, and also like in your friendship groups, and maybe in any, social organisations?
Yeah.
How do you see that presenting for women when women have low self-esteem?
Yeah, so I have different kind of friendship groups, girls who are really self-confident and girls who really are self-loathing, and how that impacts on their relationships with themselves and with others, and the whole kind of views around sex and intimacy as well. But I do think like, I don't want to generalize because everybody is individual, but I do think if you're more confident and have better self-esteem, then you're more likely to be open and get enjoyment out of your experiences rather than feel embarrassed and withdrawn. And whilst obviously women with low self-esteem do still have relationships and sex, they might focus on the negatives and be really preoccupied with the parts of themselves that they don't like and be critical. Like, I don't know about you, but if you're conscious about a body part and you're trying to cover that up while you're being intimate with somebody, that can really take away, you can't relax, you can't enjoy the experience as much as if you're sort of just all out there and living in the moment.
Absolutely, I agree. So why do you think that women link their self-esteem to how people view them sexually? So, you know, you touched upon how women can sometimes use that as an external validation.
Yeah.
So why do you think that women link that to how people view them sexually?
So when I was initially thinking about how to answer this question, I think I was focusing very much on about how women see them physically in terms of attractiveness. But I think there's also, we have lived under an umbrella of shame about women and sex for a long, long time. And thank God in the last decade or so, those taboos are being broken down. But like, if a man was having multiple partners or going out on the pull at the weekend and whatever, it was like, high five, mate. Whereas if a woman was doing something similar, there was a lot of shame about it, a lot of negative talk about what kind of a woman she was, like damaged goods and things like that. And, you know, that's really archaic, thinking back to the times where, you know, when people got married, they held the bed sheets out the window to prove that she was a virgin and things like that. Do you know, we don't live in those times. So I think women, even if women are maybe more open and are having sexual experiences and things like that, there could still be that shame attached, you know, that fear of judgment. You know, what are people going to think about me? What are my family and friends going to think about me? Are they going to call me a slut? You know, are people going to see me as damaged goods? So I think on that kind of how people view them can really be quite damaging. But then, as I said, when I was initially thinking about it, is like, do you know, how we view ourselves and what we think is sexy, what we think is attractive, and whether we think other people think that we are, and then how likely we are to go out there and enjoy ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And how do you see, you know, you touched upon sort of like that generational shame that has been brought up from sort of lack of or that imbalance between sort of the male and female as that progressed through the years. How do you now see over the sort of the last decade the role of the media, and how does that affect women's self-esteem, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, definitely for me in my late 30s, the media had a huge role to play in my self-esteem. And I think if you look at media again over decades, it tends to be the media which tells society what should be sexy, what way a woman should be, what she should look like, how she should behave. Like, if you think back to the 50s and whatever, it was the hourglass figure, like Marilyn Monroe. That's what everybody aspired to. Then when I was a teenager growing up, it was that real size 0.
Yeah.
And that's what the world was telling you. But at the same time, you also had to have curves, you had to have boobs, and you had the Wonder Bra and the billboards and all the rest of it. And all this kind of conflict and information coming at women about how you should look, how you should behave. And I do think that over the last decade, there have been a lot more campaigns, like advertisement companies, especially trying to break away from what a woman should look like and what she should be. If you think about like the Dove campaign, and all the different bodies and shapes and loving the skin you're in, no matter what it looks like, I think that's really positive and tries to show women that actually there is no one size fits all. Everybody is worthy, no matter what they look like, what their abilities are. So I think that the media is trying, but I still think that there's a lot of companies out there who do play on women's insecurities. That's how they make their money.
Yes, exactly.
You know, we've got that craze at the minute of the scrunch bum leggings.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, so, you know, wear the leggings, brilliant women, you know, women should be wearing leggings, doesn't matter about, you know, if you've got cellulite, all that, but you should have a bum that's peachy and contoured. And so it's kind of really contradictory, I think.
Absolutely.
You know, obviously we have more media channels now than we did maybe more than 10 years ago, but you've got like all your social media now, so there's a lot more on there. But I think influencers are doing a really big part in trying to challenge a lot of this stigma and challenging these big companies about, actually, do you know what, you say one thing but your actions are completely different. And
Absolutely.
I think as women we're more supporting each other and kind of saying, look, you don't have to be a certain way, you don't have to do a certain job, or it's okay if you're a stay-at-home mom. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I
You
think
are worthy as you are.
absolutely. And I think, just to add to that point, I think that also the media told us that women were to hate each other too.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is something that's also unraveling. We're here and we're sort of like, actually, no, we can be kind to each other and we can all still survive in a kind of environment, you know. So yeah, I completely agree that they sort of like dictate what's going on and how women should look and how people should feel in society. Yeah, really interesting. There was another point there, but I've completely forgot. Completely forgot what I was gonna say. There's another point there that I wanted to touch on, but I'm sure it'll come back to me in a minute.
Yeah.
So we've spoken a bit about how women sort of use sex for external validation.
Yeah.
So what do you think the effects of that are?
I think it's a falseness, personally, right? So you're using, and it comes from any external validation. I know we're specifically looking about sex and intimacy today, but if you are looking outside of yourself for validation, then it's not going to be true. You're not going to believe it, because even if you do find somebody that thinks you're really attractive, thinks you're brilliant, thinks you're the best wife, mom, the right person for the job, if you've got low self-esteem and at the core of who you are, you believe that you are not worthy and you are not good enough, it's almost like token. You know, when you get validation from external sources, it doesn't mean anything. It maybe makes you feel good for the 5 minutes or however long it lasts, if you're lucky. But it's not something that sticks around. You need more and more of it to keep creating that feeling of I'm worthy, I am good enough. So I think, yeah, we should be having as much sex and fun as we want, but I don't think it's healthy for us to be using it solely for the purpose of trying to increase our self-esteem about who we are.
Yeah. So do you agree that it is that masturbation, as you know, I'm a masturbation. Do you agree that it should, like, women should use masturbation and self-pleasure as that form of sort of validation and just within yourself and accepting yourself and being safe in your vulnerability and, you know, enjoying you before you let anybody else into that place? I think really, really contributes to, you know, those healthy boundaries going into a relationship. If you're going into a relationship and you're basing this whole situation based on how your partner feels and how your partner reacts to you, then you're absolutely not getting whatever it is that you require out of this relationship.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and it's one-sided. There's no healthy boundaries. You know, I think it's absolutely important when you enter a relationship, and I think the media has played a massive role in sort of telling us that we enter a relationship and everybody knows what's happening. You know, we don't. We're going to enter a relationship and we absolutely should be two individuals coming together to share that time together, rather than coming in and then becoming a two, you know, and just being shoved in the corner as a couple. You absolutely should both have your own thoughts and boundaries and experiences, and then build I suppose integrated boundaries for your relationship that you can explore together.
Yeah, if you don't know what feels good to you, if you haven't taken the time to explore that within yourself in the safety, of your own private space, on your own, finding out what feels good to you, what you like, how do you communicate that with a partner?
Absolutely.
You're not going into that situation thinking about what's in it for me. It's more about, how can I get this person to like me, or how can I please them? Whereas it should be a balance. It's like, yeah, but how can they please me too?
Yes, definitely. And I think that is one of the things that women were taught, wasn't it? That we were there for their pleasure, for a and so yeah, I think it's massively important for us to change that conversation, and to teach women that it's absolutely okay to hold your own wants, needs, desires, fantasies, and step into a relationship and present them. I teach this thing called healthy negotiation, because I think it's so important not to have boundaries are very absolutely important, but I think it's so important not to have such rigid boundaries when you're going into a relationship, because it is something that is ever changing. There might be something that you're like, no, absolutely not right now, but in the future, within this relationship, as it develops, you might want to explore different things.
Yeah.
So important to be safe in that knowledge of yourself, to then go ahead and sort of extend these boundaries. How does this seeking external validation in romantic relationships, how do you think that affects mental health?
I think that you might get that initial burst of feeling good. It's hitting all those endorphins. It's getting those things. Whenever we are close to somebody else, those happy hormones, they're there. But if you then step away from that situation and think back and start analysing it, as people with low self-esteem tend to do, they ruminate on every interaction, then they might realise that actually that other person had no real feelings that the other person was worthy. Like, if you're in a secure relationship, it's maybe different. But if you're kind of just starting out with somebody new, or it's casual, I think for a lot of people, men especially, they can tell when a woman has low self-confidence, and they can exploit that.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure as women are quite capable of doing it too. But a woman with low self-esteem and who's seeking external validation from somebody else, I think is quite vulnerable to the kind of person who will prey on that. And think, look, I can get what I want out of her. And when that realization hits that they have been used for the satisfaction of the other person, that is just going to reinforce all those negative self-beliefs about who they are, how they're not worthy, that they're meaningless and they're only good for serving other people, and their pleasure, their worth's not important to others. So I think it can be really damaging, because I think you can get drawn in. And I think, that's how some relationships start. I'm thinking about my own relationships from when I was in my teenage years, and it's like, right, this person has an interest in me. I'm going to do whatever it is they want me to do, because I need to keep them around so that I feel good. And I don't think that actually helps your self-esteem at all. I think that probably makes it a lot worse when you're looking at other people to make you feel good, but they're not there to do that. That's not what's motivating them at all. They're not there to pick you up at all. They're there to get what they can out of it. And when you realise that, I think that's so damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously I can massively relate to that, because I sort of went into an abusive relationship when I'd literally just turned 17. So I was, I've got a 14-year-old daughter. I couldn't imagine her ever like entering a serious relationship, let alone an abusive relationship. And Yes, I had low self-esteem. I was shameful of my sexuality. I, thinking back to my teenage years, I was so embarrassed that I wanted to masturbate. I was just ridiculously self-conscious, and a lot of low self-worth. So I've gone into this relationship, and like you said, that can be exploited. And it absolutely was. And that's not to say that, I say a lot that if I had had a comprehensive sex education that included how, masturbation and how to love me, how to be who, choose who I wanted to be in the world, but would I have found myself in an abusive relationship? And of course, I may well have done. And like you said, they exploit that. Abusers and perpetrators of abuse exploit that. But I also think that if I had had that knowledge of myself, then I would have been able to escape sooner.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about how the media influences all of this, but you've just really hit a chord with me. I went to an all-girls grammar school.
Yeah.
Our sex education was in biology, literally how the baby is made, nothing else.
Same. I was in an all-girls school too.
So it was literally, nothing about the relationship that exists within, nothing about anything about pleasure or enjoyment. It was literally the mechanics of how a baby is made and puberty.
Yeah.
So maybe if we had a little bit more about relationships and self-esteem, and like not being like very old school, like the grammar school I went to was very old school.
Yeah.
Girls were meant to be very proper. We were ladies. But there was nothing about that kind of, when we're let into the big bad world, what happens?
Yeah.
How do we see ourselves other than women who are going to go out there and be doctors or lawyers, which I didn't become either of. But that was kind of like how our education went. So yeah, maybe there is a lot to be said about how relationship education is taught in school. And I'm sure, we're talking 25 years ago now, so hopefully things have changed somewhat. My littlest one isn't old enough, I don't think, to have been in that kind of education yet. She's only 11. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And recently I spoke to Jalala, who's also a sex educator, but she is 20. I think she's just turned 26 actually. And that was a really interesting conversation because we spoke about our sex educations, and we spoke about how sort of different they were in such a short space of time. So we're definitely going in the right direction. She definitely had a lot more information than was available to me. And if we put it into context, I think she started her sex education around age 11, I think it was. At the same time I was leaving school, right? So I felt great at that. But it was so different. Like they spoke about orgasms, and they they touched upon, she said it was very little, they touched upon orgasms, and then again with sort of like LGBT with sort of the queer community, they had some information about that. She did say that it was centered on sort of like anti-bullying, and it was sort of in them in those campaigns, in the anti-bullying campaign. So it wasn't like relationship education, and learning who you were and who you wanted to present to the world. But still much more beneficial than what I had. So we're definitely going in sort of the right direction. I know that my teen has learned a lot more than I did at that age, but luckily she has me, drumming everything into her ears about relationships and who she is, and that she can be whoever she wants to be. And actually she makes me very proud every day. And again, this comes from sort of like the conversations that people are having. Like she's on TikTok, and there's influence, like you said, influencers talking about trans people and non-binary people and this, that and the other. And like every day she comes to me with questions, and every day she comes to me to teach me something too, which is fantastic. so I love, you know, that it is changing, although we obviously got the short end of the stick, and you know, we're suffering with all this stuff because we didn't have a comprehensive sex education. And it is changing for the better, and we just have to continue to have those conversations, you know. So just before we go,
yeah,
what advice do you think that we could give to women who are sort of like using relationships to build their self-esteem rather than looking inside?
Yeah. I'm kind of recap some of the points that we've discussed, I guess, but it is very much about finding your validation from within yourself rather than looking for external validation. Have as much sex and masturbation as you want to discover what feels good to you, but don't use it as your sole source of self-worth. We very much overlook the good stuff about ourselves when we have low self-esteem or poor mental health, and focus very much on the things that aren't so great or the things that we don't like about ourselves, and blow this out of proportion so that it's like the worst case scenario. And my advice to women would be, you know that you're worth more than just your body and what you can offer someone else sexually. And like, look outside of that to think about what your positives are, the little things in every day, your interactions, the things that you do, the things that you like about yourself. Some women really swear by, positive affirmations and looking in the mirror and picking out things that they like about themselves. But I think it's really important as well not to reinforce that it's not all about the way that you look. Think about your positive traits that you have too. One way of doing that can be like, look at somebody that you really admire, whether that's a friend or family member or somebody that's a celebrity, and think about what qualities that they have that you also possess within yourself, and use that to build up this whole image of yourself as being somebody who is good enough.
Absolutely love that. I'm not even going to add anything. This is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Yeah. So Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. You've been amazing.
Thank you.